That's also yours. Where's mine?
You.
Maybe it's like the trophy.
Yeah, it might be under the trophy.
Is that that's not the
No, this is how this is.
That would be really impressive.
The winner of this round is not
Just
proceeding.
take these paper.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
Come on.
Shake my head.
That was the position.
There you go. I want that. Okay. Good debate, everybody. The decision is a 2-1 for the day. I sat. I put an F. I think that you want a fairly low risk in my mind of this training neocons DA, which is basically your best piece of offense. And I think that that's outweighed by the you make debate a white supremacist space impact, which doesn't really have a lot of impact D in the 2 and R. So the first, I'll talk about training neocons. I think that y'all went some risk of this argument that by presenting their arguments, they would train the people who exist in this debate space now to better beat their arguments. But I think there's kind of 2 problems. The first is there's not really that your attempt to use the Spanos argument is like saying that because there's no uniqueness for it now, and there's only a risk we can make it worse, I guess, is your framing argument. The problem is that this that if it's true, and I think everybody agrees that debate is a neoconservative space now, that it is currently training neoconservative people, that there's not a lot of uniqueness for your argument. I think that the end of the Spanos argument is pretty good. It says, this leadership will reproduce itself as long as the training ground and debate protocols from which it emerges remains intact. A revolution in the debate must occur. And I thought they're harping on that as a phrasing in this evidence is pretty good. They're able to change, or at least there's a risk of a link turn, because they control the direction of uniqueness, and they can stop neocons from engaging us now. At least some chance. I think the second thing is that they win some external link offense, and they would train other leaders to participate to be able to fight against those people like LBS and that kind of stuff, which I think you need to do a better job than 2NR, making some comparisons between why it's a greater risk to train some neocons rather than benefit gain the external impact turn of training some leaders. So there's not a lot of work done comparing those 2 particular things. So your leader's bad, DA. It doesn't. I don't really understand what the impact is. There's kind of a vague reference to violence. There's not a reference to a card. That doesn't support your claim. And so I don't think you want a really high risk of O here. So I think they also have some external offense that is that you make this debate space by disallowing or disallowing that as arguments from being made. You turn it into a white supremacist space, which has some political value in itself. This is a Dylan Rodriguez evidence, which is extremely powerfully worded. And I think one problem for you in the reading of the evidence is that all that invisible committee stuff and stuff like that it doesn't hurt you that it's in the context of neoliberalism in terms of it doesn't apply, but it makes the clash between reading those 2 pieces of evidence more difficult for me to read. Theirs becomes more powerfully phrased when I read it in contrast to yours. I agree that these DSRB cards aren't really good, are not very great for them to debate, but it does at least establish that there's an internal link between them winning and them promoting a positive debate space. So I think the impact that making the white supremacist space is greater than the impact to your kind of training neocon argument, and that's that.
Okay, I guess I'll go next. I actually agree with a lot of what you said. I think that the thing for me that kind of tipped my decision in favor of the negative is I think that the app doesn't really have a good story on the alternative and what role imperceptible politics plays in any of this. I think it provides the uniqueness that clearly Q thought was missing for not the debate space, but at least in our ability to combat whatever thing is identified as bad, which nobody's talking about that, so I'm not really sure what it is. Modernity, colonialism, neocolonialism, whatever, what have you. I think that the training neocons argument isn't very good. I do think that you're right about your characterization of the Spanish evidence. Once again, I do agree with you, it's probably not evidence for you. However, I don't really have a reason at the end of the debate why I should think that debate is a uniquely good space for activating any sort of particular mode of politics that you say is good. You have two arguments first. I'm sorry?
The bottom of the Spanos evidence.
The bottom of the Spanish evidence just says we need a revolution of debate. I'm not sure why that means that debate is a particularly valuable space. He does say that maybe the direction needs to change. I'm not sure what the impact of that is.
Wait, so if debate is it creates neoconservatives, and neoconservatism is bad, and we can change that through debate.
We don't. I'm saying I don't think you have the ability to actualize that change.
What about the
Nor do I think that debate is sort of the locus of my decision. Like, I'm not deciding what debate should be. I'm deciding which particular methodology for engaging with neocolonials is more productive, especially since you don't have a permutation argument, which I think would help you probably. I don't know. So you have two reasons why debate is a good space. First is the training for struggle argument with Polson evidence. I think that this evidence is clearly very good, but it does actually kind of play into their Hirschach argument about the need to reject legalism in institutions. The only impact to the leadership of the Beautiful Struggle or LBS, what have you, is that it creates platforms for engaging the state in particular ways. Their argument is that you shouldn't do that. You should just turn away. I don't think this is a particularly convincing argument, but it's this weird reversal of what normally happens in these debates, and I think one that works out not in your favor. They win that you should reject this engagement a priori, which means I think they've impact turned the sort of terminal implication of your training argument, if that makes sense. So in essence, they win that if we were to train leaders to engage with the state more, all that would do would just feed white supremacy and perhaps make the problem worse. Imperceptible politics at least generate some measure of uniqueness. The second is your argument about why debate is a discursive space that is uniquely important and why we need to question subjectivity within that. I'm not really sure what the impact of this argument is. I also am not really sure, I don't know, your card doesn't really support this either. It just says that discursive space is conditioned but do not fully determine subjectivity, and the process of critique is like navigating the gap between the subjectivity and the discursive spaces that we are constrained by. I'm not really sure how that makes anything better. I don't think that the alternative has a very good chance of making anything better, let me be clear. However, without some more pushback in the 2AR arguments, I don't know why debate is an important place
I have a quick question.
to take place. Yes.
Like the explanation of like the 100 years evidence and how like they create a counter-hegemonic way in which we challenge the state and not engage the state. How does that not respond back to the
Well, but the question is whether it exists on a continuum in relation to the state. So their entire point is that we should fully reject.
How is that not a full rejection though?
It is not the impact to your LBS argument is that you get concessions from the state, and I think that the entire point is that we should, reject the possibility of that altogether. However, I do think that you have a pretty good answer to the alternative, kind of implicitly in your silencing argument about how you create a white people club. I agree with this. However, I don't know. I just think that the negative has a much better characterization of the alternative as sort of an imminent, imperceptible politics. And I don't think you've applied this argument as a link or a reason why the alternative is bad, more a reason why wrong form arguments in general are bad. But they're not just saying wrong form. They're saying that there is a better space or way for this politics to take place.
So there was no space, actually.
I'm sorry?
Can I talk about that? You said there
Yes.
was no space.
We read a double bind that says that either one, we can't talk about our issues with the state in the debate round, which would link them to the resistance debate evidence that you're indicating of silence being bad. Which you agree silence is bad, right?
No.
You don't agree that silence is bad?
They won that in this particular context, I should just, I don't know.
In this,
Decide.
the resistance debate evidence talks about debates.
Stop.
You're right, it talks about debate, but they're controlling the terminal implication of talking about debate. I think you have one that maybe you make, I don't know, debate a better place, but there's no terminal impact to that. And I think they've won a reason why their alternative is a better way of engaging with these problems. I don't think they're particularly mutually exclusive, but I don't know. Absent a strong argument by the app for that, I don't really know why that's important. Let's see. I think I got everything.
I don't agree with him about the debate space or any of that stuff argument, but the one thing that you got to think about is that idea that politics is totally inevitably fucked or whatever, is an impact turn your LBS thing. I didn't think they expressed that very well, but because they're like, LBS politics be bad too, because they try to do like organizing and that kind of shit.
But like, this is my question for you, is like, what distinction is there between the imperceivable and the whatever?
Actually, I think that some of the examples you're giving, and they recognize this, hurt you a little bit in the end. Like, you say stuff like, well, we can have a conversation with Dave Bond, and they're like, that's an example of imperceptible politics, because you're not forecasting your strategy to an audience writ large. You're not saying, here's what we're
Cross-sexing
doing,
also, since speaking on the sidewalk is
What?
imperceptible.
Well, no,
Yeah, but
that's
speaking
what-
on the sidewalk and lecturing to the public on the sidewalk are clearly distinct.
Yeah,
I just don't think.
right. You can have
You're
a
right.
discussion with someone. You can have a discussion with someone else, hone your argumentative skills, and then go out and change things on a micro-political basis in everyday life. And I think that that's better than developing a grand strategy for change that you envision for the future. And I think this is where they're accessing a little bit of your training argument, because the training argument is predicated on the idea that debate gives you skills, and then you go out and you apply those skills to pressing on real-world institutions, which I think is successfully answered by Hershak.
You know, I understand why this is frustrating, but I think that there needs to be more pushback on the thesis claim advanced by the negative, that politics is so, like, incredibly fucked now, that, and especially representational politics, because their argument about neoliberalism, I think this is also in the 2NR, expressed very clearly, it's not that, like, you are neoliberal, but that neoliberalism evolved as a response to modes of representational politics that place demands upon the state. And instead, sort of created a transnational mode of politics that they characterize their app as like
What could
a
the
representation of identity.
What could the
I don't think it's a very difficult argument to do. First, you should point out that if politics is fucked, that is better uniqueness. I think you should advance uniqueness, something that Hugh was talking about, much stronger, and explain why the alternative is bullshit, because it clearly, I don't know, is.
So
Yeah.
I think I agree with like most of what Sarah said. I think that the 1AR and 2AR are very good on this try or die argument. That essentially that's what it is. Debate everything fuck right now. We need to do something about it, even if it gets co-opted. I think that makes a lot of sense in a way where they don't have an alternative that they're explaining as well as they do, and it has like fairly good evidence. I think that the majority of their evidence is like as terrible, but the Cianos evidence and the way they're characterizing it is pretty good, especially the way they're applying it to your examples, like having a discussion with another person on an interpersonal level rather than broadcasting it, the difference between, as Sue said, speaking on the sidewalk versus speaking on the sidewalk to a walking in public who then goes to coalition. I think that ultimately it's a risk of you being able to solve the racism and debate impact versus them being able to solve racism writ large, but I think that the backlash arguments also internally from your ability to solve the debate because they're winning, that the reaction to, like for example, the DSRBM theory says we should do this in ELM rounds because people's reaction is mimicry. They see what's successful and then do it. They're directly contesting that and saying people's reaction isn't mimicry, it's backlash. They'll take the skills that they learned from writing the case tag and then apply them to the real world. One place I differed from Suo and quickly is I thought that the Spanish evidence was not very good for you. I think that the last line says we need a revolution in debate, but what prompts that conclusion is debate is producing bad stuff right now, so we should stop it from producing bad stuff. But that's not an argument as to why debate and debating about things in that forum is a productive mode for preventing debate from producing bad things.
Remember the sentence before that?
Well, no,
As long as those practices continue, it will continue to be a bad thing.
But then immediately before that, it says, judges having got players instead of learn this interest argument of skills, and then use those to disarm the just causes of the oppressed. It seems like those skills.
Right, I agree with you on this. I don't think it's that important ultimately.
Yes. I think the sentential evidence is good at Latinidad, and I think if you explained this more, it could have been a no length, but ultimately I didn't really know what it was after the round. I read the evidence to try and formulate an idea of what it was. The quotes that I thought stood out were that it's a resistant oppositional stance and anti-discourse to the discourse of power that allows us to challenge mainstream through criticisms of whiteness and racialization, etc. But the point is, they're saying that this anti-discourse isn't self-problematic, almost as problematic as the discourse of power, because and sentential is sort of like too descriptive of what Latinidad is. It doesn't say where those getting reincorporated into the sort of legalistic system inside of it. And ultimately, I think the Colson evidence is very good at drawing the internal link between debate and activism. Debate is training. I think you definitely win that argument. The question is training for what? It establishes the connection between what the LDS did in debate and what they're doing in the real world. But what they're doing in the real world is like organizing community. They ran for office. They're doing all the things that they're saying get reincorporated into the system, and that's probably bad.
What about a question like internet, like it becomes co-opted?
Well, that's why things are gaining some leeway, gaining ground with the alternative and the description of working in a way that doesn't forecast your strategy to the people who can then beat it down. It works in sort of smaller, more invisible ways.
They give the example of the Zapatistas. I don't know. This is not a very
Speaking of
good
that-
alternative argument. I'm not.
Speaking of that, you should point out the fact that the Zapatistas were as far from an example of what they're talking about as possible. Like their entire power was because they were like an internet revolution that went global because everybody was
They
watching
marched
them. Yeah.
Really
They,
long.
they stopped. They stopped.
I cannot imagine something that was more visible.
Yeah, their whole point, they like set up pickup lines would let people go to work. It's like not.
So the one thing, the one thing I'll say to you, they talked a lot about alternative. I was saying I didn't think it was very well explained at all, especially in the context of debate, which is the thing that mattered to me. What does debate look like? If it's invisible, they said invisible debate is white debate, and that kind of makes sense in the context of how debate operated. They thought the kind of theoretical measure of corporate places, but I didn't think, without explaining in the context of what debate looked like, what this debate is about. You guys know that. Okay.
Just really quick, two things in the future that I think would probably make this argument go away. First, three things actually. First, permutation. I don't know. Throw it out there. Why not? And the way the debate shook out, the links they went for, I think the permutation will solve. Second, better defense of like the practices of debate, of argumentation and contestation, why those are incredibly important. And three, I was so hoping that one arrow would just pull a fast one. The block was a double term, because they said imperceptible block is good, and they said you're unpredictable framework. Then like, yes, we are unpredictable, concede that's good, forcing us to do the same is bad. Sit down after 45 seconds, and there's no way.
The way I would read on that is to concede that institutions do the stuff on the framework, and then the internal language is a better trained.
I was looking for a way which I knew that's why I said.
Yeah, you should have been like there. You should have been.
Framework better.
Yeah.
That's an impact term.
Oh no, I was going to say the opposite direction. Yeah, I don't really. Yeah.
Then there's still.
We are unpredictable. Yeah. What do you think? They said you're unpredictable. That means you're imperceptible. That means there's literally no link to the K.
That makes sense.
Yes. And then